So I mean, if you're lucky and hit that sweet spot, you might get a return that you will never see on the stock market.
The most exclusive part of the business, business law.
The word shares is very common and everybody talks about it.
Mm-hmm.
And there is different way of selling and buying shares, but it's also two different types of shares. Can you please explain to me what is it?
Correct. Well, there are a million types of shares and situations, but the basic is that we have publicly traded shares, and we have privately held shares. So the publicly traded, those are on the regulated markets like Nasdaq and so forth, the stock exchange. So they are fairly easy to buy and to sell because you have an open market. Every day that's a regular bank day, you can trade them. All you need really is your mobile phone and a financial institute that will allow you to have an account. And you can press buy and sell and whichever number, how much you're willing to sell them for, really. So they're really liquid, rather safe since you can sell at any time. But then we have the option. Privately held shares.
Yeah.
And the privately held company is all other company that is not publicly traded.
Okay, which means what's the difference between them?
That you cannot go to a stock exchange. There's no open market for them.
Okay, so I cannot use my mobile phone?
No.
Private share.
I mean, there are some platforms that try to kind of match make between buyer and seller, but we'll leave those aside now. And the privately held company, it can be just as big as a company on the stock market. I mean, Google can be either on the stock market or not.
Okay, but what determined to be a public company or a private company?
Yeah, and just to make it a bit complex, the term public company does not mean you're publicly traded, really. But in order to be publicly traded, you need to be a public company.
Okay, that makes sense.
So let's stick to the publicly traded companies and the privately held. So, fairly easy to trade publicly traded companies, right? The privately held. First and foremost, it's very hard to find a seller and a buyer. That means that if you want to invest or buy into a private company, you need to kind of have contacts or in some way reach that company.
Okay, so I need to contact the company by myself. That's the most common way of doing it.
Yeah, or perhaps you have an entrepreneur, a friend who's running a startup who approaches you and wants you to invest. That's quite common nowadays.
Okay, and then I say to the person, I want to buy shares in your company because I believe in your company.
Mm.
It could be a startup or an old company, but as long as it's private.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So you can buy privately. But what you were talking about now was investing into the company. And that's different from buying shares from another shareholder.
Mm-hmm. And what's the difference?
So either if you invest into the company, the money goes into the company. You invest in new shares that the company issues to you. But if it's a secondary transfer that we're talking about now, buying and selling existing shares, you need to find the shareholder and buy the shares from that person. So your money will not go into the company, it will go to the seller of the shares.
And then you just get, but you get the right to the shares in the company instead.
Yeah, you become the owner of the shares.
Oh, so I don't buy the shares from the company, I buy it from the shareholder.
Yeah. And if you own shares in the company, you're trying to find a buyer for them, then you will, of course, get the money, so not the company.
Mm.
And here is what most people need to really, really think about. Because many, of course, wonder what is the risk, right, with buying privately held shares. And that is really, really, really hard to find a buyer, in particular if we're talking about a startup. Because any new investor looking at that startup will not want to buy shares that exist, and they will not want to give you the monies, because they will want to put the monies into the company. So if you have a startup that's trying to fundraise and they're looking for an investor, and you already own shares in that startup, so if you turn to the investor and say, can you buy my shares for $1 million? Then the investor will say, no, thank you. Because I prefer to invest my monies into the company where I become a shareholder. Because then the company can use the monies to grow, because it still needs the capital to survive.
Okay, because if he bought it from me, then he would just get the shares and the company would not get the money. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, I understand.
So during the startup phase and the scaling phase of a company, it can be really hard to sell the shares, to find a buyer. It doesn't have to be like that. I mean, if you own shares in the next Facebook and the investors are running after the company like crazy, they might be willing to buy your shares. But typically, it's very hard to find a buyer.
Okay, but what is the biggest risk? I mean, if I have shares in a company and I don't get them sold, what can I do then?
Wait and see.
That's the only thing.
Yeah, basically. I mean, you can try to sell them at a lower price if you're willing. But just be aware that even if on paper your shares are worth 2 million, in reality, they might not be liquid. You might not be able to sell them. And then also, if you invest in a startup, you will typically be asked to sign a shareholders agreement. In that agreement, there will be transfer restrictions.
Okay, and that means
You cannot go and sell the shares to a third party without, most typically, offering the shares to the other shareholders in the company first.
oh, so I cannot just sell them to whoever I want.
No. So you should be mindful that either in the Articles of Association or in the shareholders agreement, there will be clauses and regulation that says that you cannot just go and sell them to any third party. So that's also important to know, so you don't miss on that.
Okay, and that was, what was the agreement called?
The shareholders agreement.
Shareholders agreement.
That's agreement between all of the owners in the company. And then the Articles of Association, that's a document that states the core of the company, really. Like what is the name, what type of business, how many board of directors will it have, how many shares will it have, and so forth.
And the shares are already decided beforehand, right? So the company can decide to have, we only have, say, 2,000 shares. Or can you change that within time?
Absolutely. You can increase it. So the Articles of Association can say how many shares you're allowed to have. And if you want to increase it even more, you just change the Articles of Association, which all of the shareholders can do together at a shareholders meeting, a general meeting.
Okay.
So it's a bit
bit complex. But it's a bit clear for me now.
And I must also add, since I'm a fan of startups, that they can be also a brilliant opportunity. Because you might get the opportunity to invest really early on, because you really believe in the founder, you really see the potential, and you might even be able to contribute. So, I mean, if you're lucky and hit that sweet spot, you might get a return that you will never see on the stock market.
Yes, and that's the hard part, to see if it will be good or not.
Yeah.
Then you have to really believe it.
You have to be both a dreamer and realistic, understand the risks.
Thank you. And if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to drop down below. And don't forget to subscribe and like our channel. Thank you.